Nazi Nukes. Written by Chris Lowry. Narrated by Thomas Gloom. Chapter 1. Warner Yeager settled the headset against his ear and tried to tune out the chirping of the tree frogs and crickets that threatened to drown on the ping he just heard. He waved the metal wand in his hand back and forth across the ground. There was again a definite ping. He reached into the pouch he carried at his side and placed an orange flag on a thin wire into the soft earth, then glanced up at the sky. Twilight was falling, and he cursed. "Damn it," he muttered. There wasn't enough time to hike back to his car, lug out the ground-penetrating radar equipment he had jury-rigged into a backpack, and make it to the spot before night fell in the Black Forest. It would be too dark to hunt. Too dark to determine if his reasoning was correct, or if he had just discovered another false hope buried under 70 years of loam and dirt. He sighed and turned back to his car. He drew a small can of red paint from his pocket and blazed the trees nearest the orange flag. It had happened in the past that when he returned to a spot where he knew a flag had been, it was gone. Even his footsteps had been erased. Warner Yeager had been hunting for Nazi secrets for the better part of 20 years, and he knew that some wanted the past kept buried. He knew that whoever wanted to keep it hidden could steal the flag this time. He had come prepared. Chapter 2. They call it van life in the U.S., but no matter how you sliced it, Warner was still homeless. He lived in the back of his van, modified with a mattress and piled with gear and belongings that he struggled to keep neat. He kept folding camp chairs and a tarp strapped to the roof for the occasions where he found a spot he could set up for more than one night. He would stretch the tarp for shelter, set up the chairs outside of the van, and make a porch which doubled as kitchen and dining area. If someone had suggested to him that he would be living in a van in a foreign country at some point in his life, Warner would have laughed in their face. Love is a fickle bitch. Still, he ran into interesting people living a dirtbag life. There was no expensive rent to pay, and so his costs were extremely low. He could make a month's food bill in one day of artifact hunting and selling to a local pawn shop, and he had a month's food in the van and money to pay for next month in a savings account, so at least that was covered. Sometimes it was only beans and rice, but he just reasoned that helped keep him trim. The dirtbag van life allowed him to pursue his passion of treasure hunting and trail running. He ran every day and worked out on tree limbs, doing pull-ups and climbs and dropping to crank out sets of push-ups. Once that was done, he would either go to a library to conduct research or comb the hidden forest trails searching for a clue he had uncovered. It had been one such clue in a paper archive that led him to the edge of the forest where he was encamped. There was an editorial about the going-ons in the forest outside of the village, a rant against secrets in the woods. That was all. Warner took to the trees to bushwhack a run to see what he could discover. Ever since he was a young boy, he could navigate the woods without much fear. Call it an innate sense of direction. He never seemed to get lost. And if he occasionally found a new way back to camp, that was just wandering. He wandered among the game trails and brush, searching, and when he came across an old, overgrown path as wide as a roadway, his stomach surged in excitement. He ran back to the van, blazing the trail with flags, gathered his equipment, and promptly lost his way. The flags were removed. He found the trail again before dark, made his way back to camp in the twilight, and again the flags went missing as he searched the next morning. Resolved, Warner loaded up a can of spray paint and his equipment. He found the road and followed it to the terminus, marking trees along the way. At the end of the road, he found a clearing. The woods were on their way to reclaiming the land as nature abhors a vacuum, but Warner could pace off the dimensions through thick grass. It was 400 yards by 100. If it was an abandoned bunker, it was a big one. He cast around the edges of the wood, searching for obvious openings. Sometimes, in their haste to cover their tracks, the retreating soldiers didn't cover entrances well enough, and over the years, the dirt settled on the uneven ground. It created a slight depression and change in landscape for those who knew how to find it. But Warner could not. He unstrapped the clunky metal detector and began searching. It took him most of the day, and twilight began to filter through the trees before the pings let him know he found something. He marked the spot with paint and a flag and made his way back to camp, shooting small mist of aerosol along the way to mark his path. Chapter 3. The flags were missing again the next day, but the splotches of paint sprayed on the trees were still there. Yeager followed them along the blazed path with a rucksack full of gear and a fully charged smartphone so he could take pictures. He was already anticipating the discovery. Chances are the bunker would be empty. Many were. But there was also a chance he would run across some artifacts from the era which he could offload with a collector he knew and put some cash in his pocket. If it was really good stuff, depending on the condition, he could bypass the collector and go to some black market contacts he had. There were some real sick people in the world who liked to possess nasty things, or things that once upon a time represented nasty times. Yeager just picked them up and delivered them, and pocketed the cash with a no harm, no foul state of mind that served him well so far. He reached the clearing faster today, just as the morning sun started to drift over the treetops. He unshouldered his pack and scratched out an outline of the hole in the ground and started scraping down in one corner. He only went 4 inches or so before hitting metal. He nearly split his cheeks with a grin. It took less than an hour to scrape off the rest to reveal a sheet of metal over a doorway. He worked on that for an hour more before he could pry open an edge and make a small passageway. Yeager grabbed a long mag light from his back and slipped a backup torch into his belt. He started back toward the opening and paused. Sure, the bunker was probably closed for the past 70 years, but what if there was another opening? And what if some animal decided to make a den of the place? It wouldn't be the first time something wild had chased him out of a hole. He turned around and grabbed a machete, just in case. Yeager slipped into the dark recess behind the metal door and flicked on the flashlight. The strong beam washed over the dusty concrete that led further back into the black. The dust was thick and undisturbed, so at least no animals had made it this far. He waved the light back and forth. There were no artifacts either. Just rough concrete walls, a rough concrete floor, and the only difference the ceiling had were bare bulbs hanging every 10 yards or so. He glanced over at the wall and saw a breaker box. Yeager opened the box carefully. It squealed in the darkness and sent goosebumps up and down his arms. No matter how brave he was, there was an atavistic response to noises in the dark. He dropped the switch, and nothing happened. He didn't really expect it to, but it would have been nice to push back the darkness, even if only every other bulb worked. He turned back to the tunnel, aimed the light toward the end, and gripped the handle of the machete before he started marching. Chapter 4. At the end of the tunnel was a large, open, cavernous space. Yeager surmised it extended well beyond the edge of the clearing above. He had traveled at least 100 meters on a gradual slope to discover the large, empty bunker. He played the beam of light across the empty room, disappointed at the lack of any artifacts or proof that the bunker had even been used. He sighed. It looked like this expedition was another bust. One more in a series that would keep him eating beans and rice for lunch and dinner until he could score again. He pulled out his camera phone and snapped off a few shots to post on an urban explorer site he occasionally visited. The flash filled the cavern with explosions of blue, and he caught the edge of a shadow out of the corner of his eye. He turned the mag light on it and saw a door nestled into the wall. It was 15 feet across, twice as high, and partially open, creating the shadow against the smooth surface of the concrete as the light played over it. Yeager investigated. It took him a moment to open the doorway. The mechanism had frozen on its tracks, caked by decades of dust. The grease turned to grit and grime. He placed both feet against the wall and shoved with his back to squeeze open enough room to fit through. He fell through with a small fear that the door might rebound shut, but it didn't. It remained where he moved it, the same grit he fought against now working in his favor as a doorstop. Yeager stood up and dusted off his hands and knees. He fumbled the light up and sucked in his breath. The narrow beam revealed 6 long, rocket-shaped canisters mounted on rail carts and aimed toward the far wall. Another door, the mirror of the one he came through, stood closed there, with rails leading under. The rockets could be carried through the door on a rail system. He held up his phone and started clicking photos and closed his eyes against the flash of the bulb to preserve his night vision. It was shot anyway because the bright strobe made it through his eyelids. When he opened them again, spots still danced in a kaleidoscope of colors. The shadows shifted and swirled together as he drew closer to the rockets. Each was roughly 40 or 50 feet long, about 6 feet around. He saw the familiar symbol of a faded swastika and shuddered. Nazis. He was in the right place for it, and the tubes were definitely World War II relics. This was something he would have to sort through the collector, though, if he even could. He wondered if they were still live and backed away from the silver cylinders. The light of the flashlight played across another symbol he was familiar with. 3 squares on a yellow background. Nuclear. He zeroed the light in on the symbol and studied it for a moment. A clear symbol on a Nazi rocket from the last World War. The Nazis had nukes. Yeager backed away and bumped up against the wall. This was a find. Most treasure hunters go their whole life without a big haul. But being the man who discovered unknown Nazi nukes would put him on the cover of every magazine. He'd make the rounds of talk shows, maybe even get his own show on Discovery or Travel Channel. Finally, big corporations would start to fund his treasure hunting ventures. There was the hunt for the Amber Room he wanted to conduct, a lost pirate treasure on an island of Costa Rica, a Templar treasure on the Dominican Republic. His head filled with visions of how it would go. A giant trawler retrofitted for his adventures, a camera crew and assistants following him as he made films of his adventures. A book deal, maybe one for each new find. This was huge. He grinned in the darkness and lifted the camera again to snap pictures of the symbol on the rockets. No one knew the Nazis had nuclear weapons during the war, he thought he remembered. There must have been experimenting, though. A lot. Because the US and Russia repatriated German scientists to build their own nuclear bombs. This find would rewrite history, and Warner Yeager's name would be on it. He strolled around the 6 missiles, capturing them from different angles and recording them to his device. He walked to the door on the far end and tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. A set of shelves next to the door contained some small artifacts he could sell right away for some quick cash while he waited for the big payday to come down the pipe. He smiled as he rested the machete on the top shelf and filled his bag with 2 dust-covered bayonets, a partially disassembled Luger, and cartridges marked with swastikas, ammunition used exclusively by the SS. There was even a dust-covered flag folded on the second shelf he carefully inserted into his pack. Yeager had to remind himself to be patient. This discovery was his, and he could come back to do more searching with better light. The first thing he had to do, though, was get the word out about the discovery to start the ball rolling on the big payday. And he knew just the right person who loved big paydays and happened to be a journalist. Not that he needed a reason to call Heidi again, but this time, she might listen. Chapter 5. The phone trilled in his ear. He let it ring 6 times, hung up, and dialed again. Come on, he muttered into the headset. She answered. Warner? She sighed. I told you not to call me. The memory of her accent sent a thrill down his groin, cultured, guttural, and electric, much like Heidi. She was the reason he left the U.S. She was the reason he became a treasure hunter, and she was the reason he spent most of his nights now alone in the woods. Hell, she was the reason he spent most of his nights alone. Heidi, he whispered, I found something. Why are you whispering? I can barely hear you. They might be listening. Who are they? No, Warner, no. I'm hanging up now. Wait, he shouted into the phone. Don't hang up. The dial tone answered him. He tried again, and it rang over to a busy signal. She must have tipped the house phone off the hook, so he couldn't get through. He'd have to go over. If they were in the U.S., she probably would have pulled a restraining order on him. Germany wasn't so vigilant about it yet. Not that he was violent, far from it with her. Quite the opposite, actually. When he found her riding another lover in the bed he shared, he got angry and yelled. She hit him in the balls. Then her lover got out of bed and beat him senseless. He came to in a pile of his own blood-covered clothes at the front of the apartment. He attempted to reason with her. There was no way he could be homeless in another country, and her lover handily emptied out his wallet before depositing him on the wet sidewalk. She wouldn't listen. So he stole her car. He reasoned that the hairy man she was sexing up paid for it, or at least a long-term rental. But where the German court systems were a little lax on stalking law restraints, they were very up-to-date on car theft, or car borrowing. They found it the next day while he was in a roadside cafe making use of the facilities. Warner slipped out of the back door, and just like that, became a slightly wanted fugitive. It took him months to build up the money to fund a treasure expedition, and luck played a big role in that. Now that he had actually discovered something, he needed to share it with the world, and Heidi was the only journalist he knew. It wasn't the Amber Room, a treasure she would have squealed over and probably taken him back if he had found. But it was big. Nukes. Ancient nuclear bombs on old missiles. His breath caught in his throat as he remembered the dust-covered faded yellow and black radiation symbol etched on the cylinders. Someone needed to know. He should call the police, he reasoned, but they might take exception at a fugitive turning in tips. Besides, he didn't want to go to jail. He wanted a news story and some fame, and maybe a little money to go along with it so he could hire an attorney to take care of the problem. That resolved, he shoved his hands in his pockets and wandered back to the old beat-up van he called home and headquarters. He was going to knock on Heidi's door and make her listen to his story. Chapter 6. He knocked on her door 3 times before she opened it. He caught his breath at the sight of her. She glared at him. What do you want, Warner? She spat. I found something, he answered. I don't want to hear about it. She tried to shut the door. He pulled a tried-and-true salesman technique and blocked the door with his boot. But you will want to hear about it, he rushed. Did you finally find a treasure? Her tone was mocking. Yes, he started to say. Her eyes lit up in greed, and she relaxed the door open a bit. But not a treasure like you think. Another kind of treasure. He watched her fingers tense on the door as she halted the swing inching open. What is it? She licked her lips. Heidi was an opportunist, he knew, and the hint of something more or something better would hook her. Maybe she saw something in his eyes, or in the fervent stance as he stood on the stoop. "I found a bunker from World War II. "So what?" she shrugged. "People find bunker ruins all the time. The hills are riddled with bolt holes." But she didn't shut the door. "What was in it?" She licked her lips again. "Let me in, and let's talk about it over a drink." He smiled as she stood back and nodded him through the door. "Rolf will be home in an hour," she warned him. "He won't find you here." "I'll be fast," he said and wiggled his eyebrows. She didn't smirk, didn't crack a smile. If she had, he might have thought he stood a chance. 1 in a million, maybe, but a chance nonetheless. Chapter 7. "There you go, Warner. Now you're famous." He stared at the story she had posted on her computer screen and clicked refresh a couple of times. "What are you doing?" She slapped away his hand. "I don't know. I expected it to get viewed or go viral or something." She shoved him away from her workstation. "It doesn't work like that, asshole." She kept pushing him toward the door. "It's after midnight. People won't read it until tomorrow. Get out. Go home." He put his rough, calloused hands on top of her long, thin, soft fingers as they pressed into his chest. "Are you sure you don't want me to stay?" he said in a low whisper. She popped him across the jaw and he stumbled into the wall. "No, Warner, I don't want you to stay. I don't want you in here in the first place. But you had a good story. I posted it. It's out there. Now you get out there too, or I'll tell Rolf." "Fuck Rolf." Warner cursed his sore jaw. "I did, and I will when he gets home. And if you don't leave, he may fuck you too." Warner stood up and straightened his hair. He gathered what was left of his dignity and marched for the door. "When I found this, I couldn't wait to share it with you. You're the only person I think about." "Think again, Warner. We're over. Kaput. Finito. Done. It doesn't matter what you discover. It's never going to happen between us again." He cracked open the door and stood in the frame for a moment. "Why, Heidi? Can you just tell me why after I came over here for you and did all of this for you? Why didn't you just talk to me about it first? I didn't ask you to come over here. You followed me. We were in love. We had sex 72 times. God, Warner, you counted?" "Of course you count," he said. "It was magical. For you," she put her hands against the door and started shoving him out with it. "For me, it was a chore. Something I did out of boredom, like flipping through the channels, and it left me about as satisfied. Now get out." A giant hand clamped down on his collar and yanked him all the way out into the hall. Rolf lifted him up and growled rancid breath across his face. "You." "Me?" Warner cringed. Rolf held him at arm's length and slowly drew back his fist. He took his time to make sure Warner could see it coming. And he could. The fist was large, dense, thick scar-covered knuckles that looked like they could bust a nose or cheekbone or eye socket with very little effort. There are moments in a man's life that define his character, and getting pummeled was one of them. Rolf was a giant, some throwback to genetic selection that placed him over 6'8" and a solid wall of muscle. Being beat by him was inevitable, like a glacier carving through the soft soil of a valley. Warner knew he couldn't win. Rolf knew he couldn't either, and so fighting back would be an exercise in futility, like punching a bear. It might hurt his fist and piss off the bear. The fist reached the zenith of the apex and Rolf grinned. In a fight, even against superior odds, when defeat is inevitable, a man is faced with choices. But the choice to take it like a man didn't really suit Yeager, and the grin just pissed him off. Rolf released a small, happy sigh and tensed. Warner kicked him in the nuts. Hard. Even giants have their weak spots, and Warner had seen Rolf in the nude. His weak spot was larger than average, with giant dangling weak spots that floated around commando under the thin sweatpants he had worn to work out. His toe connected with the target, but Yeager wasn't swinging for just that spot. Like a good soccer player, or golfer, or even a karate expert, Warner knew that no one swings for the sweet spot. It's better to swing for a 0.5 feet past the sweet spot to gain better execution of the arc. Rolf collapsed on the flight of stairs. The kick was so sweet, so pure and powerful that the giant man couldn't even yowl. He did manage a mule. Spittle dripped from his slack mouth. Yeager extracted himself from the tumbled heap and stared down in pity. His father had taught him to avoid fighting, but when fighting was unavoidable, cheat and be the one to walk away. He straightened the collar on his shirt. Rolf cupped his wounded crotch in one hand and reached out to grasp Warner's leg with the other. There was no way he was going to let go until he recovered and finished the beating. Only this time, it would be worse. He would multiply the pain and make Warner beg for death. But death wouldn't come, only the merciless onslaught of giant fists. Yeager kicked him again, this time in the stomach. Rolf couldn't breathe. The muling was soundless gasps. He cradled his stomach with both hands. Yeager lashed out and planted his foot in the giant's nuts again. Rolf passed out. He didn't stick around this time to gloat or stand over his vanquished foe. He scurried down the stairs and into the night. Chapter 8. Yeager slowly jogged toward his van. He kept casting glances over his shoulder, just to be sure Rolf didn't chase after him. He was pretty sure he could outrun the giant in a foot race, but did not want to be caught unaware. He watched the apartment door as he crossed the street to the driver's side that faced away from him. A man stepped out of the shadows by the rear bumper and punched him in the face. Yeager collapsed on the street. "Swine," the man muttered in German. He yanked Yeager off the dirty asphalt and slammed him into the door of the van. The metal dented. His attacker pulled a vintage Luger from his jacket pocket and pressed it against Yeager's neck. "For the glory of the Führer," the man growled in sauerkraut-scented breath. Yeager gagged. "Don't bleed on my shoes." Rolf grabbed the man, holding him by the scruff of his coat, and tossed him across the sidewalk into the darkness beyond. They listened as the man rolled down the embankment in a series of crashes, yelps, and short outbursts of pain. "You're dead," Rolf growled and reached for Yeager. It worked one time, so he tried again with a knee to the groin. Rolf twisted and took it on the thigh. His face split in a leer as strong hands closed on Yeager's throat and lifted him off the ground to slam him into the van again. A gun butt bounced off Rolf's skull. He slithered into a collapsed heap on the sidewalk, dropping Warner beside him. "Hello, Mr. Yeager," menaced a voice. Yeager glanced up. A man stood over him in gray pants, gray shirt, and black, shiny boots. It looked every inch a uniform without any emblems or epaulet. It was modeled after something familiar, some military picture he had seen before. "Crap," Yeager muttered. "Not crap, Mr. Yeager. I am Major Dieter of the SS. He held a black-gloved hand down to Warner and jerked him off the ground. "You will come with us," he motioned with his head. "What about your friend?" Yeager glanced around, searching for a way to escape. "He is of no consequence," Dieter stated. "But you, Mr. Yeager, you are very much of some consequence, or there will be consequences for what you have learned." Rolf groaned and rolled over. He pushed himself to his knees. It distracted Dieter and the second soldier he was with. The moment was all Yeager needed. He shoved Dieter into the soldier and took off running. The two men untangled themselves and started after. Rolf swiped a giant paw and caught the soldier by the foot. The man screamed as the giant crawled up his back and smashed his face into the asphalt with a loud crunch. Dieter cracked his skull with the gun again and gave chase to Yeager. But it was too late. The street was empty. Chapter 9. Yeager sprinted around the corner and searched the sidewalk and street. It was almost empty, but up ahead, in the distance, he saw a shimmering light spilling from a doorway. A sign above the window announced pub. He ran for the door and glanced over his shoulder before slipping inside. He shouldered his way through the small crowd staring at the football match on an ancient TV bolted to the ceiling and settled into a corner of the bar. The bartender rolled over. "Beer?" he asked. "Knob Creek," Yeager ordered. The bartender pointed to the man next to him. "He killed the bottle." The man glanced over at Yeager. He was average height, muscled like an endurance athlete with an air of danger and menace about him. He stared at Yeager with unforgettable eyes. "I'll give you $10 for that glass," Yeager gasped. The man slid it across the bar top. "You look like you need it more than I do," he said. Yeager quaffed it and slammed the empty down. "Two more," he called to the bartender. "Next best for me and my new friend here." "Thank you," he said. Yeager held out his hand. "No, thank you. It's good to hear a voice from home. I'm Warner Yeager." "Bill Wingfield," said the man as he shook the outstretched hand. "I was taught to always buy a fellow expat a drink when I was able. I'm just glad I can return the favor." They toasted and sipped from the glasses the bartender set in front of them. Yeager sucked his down and glanced at the door as it opened up. Two of the guards from his van stepped inside and glanced around. He ducked. "Trouble?" asked Brill. "The kind I don't need," said Yeager. "Nazis." "Those are still around?" "Apparently, and they're after me." Brill slid off the bar stool and finished his drink. He nodded toward a man trying to hide discreetly in the corner. "He's watching you too. Why don't you see if there's a back door?" Yeager glanced at the man in the corner who buried his head in a beer bottle. The two SS guards noticed him and started shoving their way through the crowd. "Go," said Brill as he moved to intercept. Yeager hurried for the hallway and what he hoped was a back exit. He glanced over his shoulder and watched his bar buddy do something fast with his hands. Both the SS collapsed to the ground in unconscious lumps. Yeager ran down the hall, slipped through the kitchen, and yipped in excitement as he found a back door. He almost crashed through it into the underlit alley and paused to decide which way to go. A hand fell on his shoulder. It was the man from the corner booth. "I know someplace safe," he grunted and led Yeager down the alley away from the street. "Wait." He tried to disengage, but strong fingers clamped down on his arm and steered him with ease. "It is no problem," the man continued. "I am Mosey. We have been watching you. I am here to help you." Chapter 10. Mosey opened the door and stepped back to usher Yeager in. It was pitch black inside. Not even lights from the street penetrated the windows. He swallowed. "Listen," said Yeager. "Thanks for helping me and all, but I think I'm going to be going." Mosey shook his head. He grabbed Yeager's wrist and twisted his arm behind his back and up between his shoulder blades, then duck-walked him forward into the dark room. "Ow!" shouted Yeager. "You're hurting me, damn it!" "It does hurt, yes," said Mosey. He plowed Yeager into a metal pole in the middle of the room with a resounding clang. The captive whimpered and clutched the growing knot on his brow with his free hand. "What was that?" "Pole," said Mosey. He released Yeager and flipped on the lights. Another man sat in a chair next to the curtained windows. "You're just sitting in the dark?" Yeager asked the stranger as he alternated between rubbing his brow and rubbing his wrist. "My thoughts exactly," asked Mosey. "What, and waste the electric?" the man in the chair offered. He was the same height as Mosey, with similar features. The men could have been related. Cousins, maybe. "Are you guys cousins?" asked Yeager. Mosey spun him around and yanked his hands away from his head. He pulled Yeager's arms around the pole and zip-tied them. "Cousins? Maybe," he answered. "Are you my cousin, uncle?" The older man lifted a large hat off his balding head to reveal a shining dome. "It is possible," he groaned as he stood up and walked over to face Yeager. "It is more likely I am your uncle, though, and deserve to be treated with respect." He yanked Yeager's head back by the hair and punched him across the jaw. Yeager spit blood on the floor. "What the hell did you do that for?" "To remind you," warned the uncle as he wagged a finger under Yeager's nose. He slapped him again and rocked the man's head against the metal pole in the middle of the room. Mosey walked around behind Yeager and stood next to his uncle. "Should we tell him?" "What use is telling him?" the old man argued. "He may be working with them." "He's not working with them," sighed Mosey. "If he was working with them, they would not put his picture on the news." "You don't know the way they think." His uncle tapped a gnarled finger to his temple. "I do. I have hunted these bastards for 70 years now." "You're only 66, Mosey reminded him. "Yes, but I thought about it before I was born." His uncle motioned him over to the window and bent his head in close. "We do not share our secrets lightly," he said. Yeager could still hear them. "I can still hear you," he called out. "If you're going to say something that I shouldn't hear and then kill me because I overheard you, I'm just letting you know I can still hear you. So talk quieter or something." "He is harmless, uncle," Mosey continued in a low voice. "A homeless man with no affiliation." "He is stooping the reporter," the uncle countered. "Not anymore," interjected Yeager. "Not for months now." The old man raised an eyebrow as he glanced over his shoulder at the bound man. "You were there tonight, no?" "You followed me?" "We followed the men who were following you." "Yes," said Mosey. "I didn't stoop her." Yeager raised his chin. "He could have stooped her," said the uncle. "It would be a quick stoop, but he looks the type." "Hey," said Yeager, "I can stoop for a long time. I don't stop till we're both satisfied." "Booby, I saw her when you left," said the uncle. "She did not look satisfied." "That's because there was no stooping. I did not stoop her. Not tonight." Mosey waved him off. "See, uncle, he's innocent, at least of collaboration with the journalist. We need to know what he knows." "I'll tell you what I know." "To be sure he is telling us the truth, we must employ the pain." "Don't employ the pain," said Yeager. "I'll tell you everything. Fire the pain. Lay it off. Don't employ the pain." "He's joking," said Mosey. "Would an evil man joke like this?" "I have seen the evil that men do, and they will laugh at another man's pain. They laughed at this." He held up his left hand. It was more a claw than a hand. The broken fingers healed into misshapen lumps and bumps, gnarled, scarred, and scary. Yeager gulped. "Look, I found this bunker, and there were nuclear bombs in it, I think from World War II. They had a swastika on them. That's all I know, I swear." The old man moved away from Mosey and began rooting around in a bag next to the table by the window. He pulled out a ball-peen hammer, a pair of pliers, and a knife. Yeager gulped again, louder this time. "I thought you were rescuing me." "Torture, rescue. It's two sides of the same coin, yes?" "No!" shouted Yeager. "No, it's definitely not two sides of the same coin. It's opposite coins, quite different coins. Mosey shrugged. No skin off my back. Maybe a little of yours? What do you think? Yeager tried to press further into the pole, but it didn't yield. Damn metal pole and the zip tie holding him. Something clicked in his mind. Zip tie. He thought about it for a second as he watched the old man prepare. Mosey went to the wall next to the window and watched too, a disgusted expression on his face. Yeager worked the tip of his finger into the small block of plastic the strap of the tie fed through. He dug with the tip of his nail to catch the plastic tooth holding the strap in place. Zip ties were a strip of plastic with grooves on one side. Those grooves fed through the block and thin piece of plastic, and the angle held the strip in place. It took 8 tries, but when the old man picked up a hammer and limped toward him, Yeager managed to catch the edge of the tooth with his nail. He yanked and pulled. The zip tie slid open, and he was free. Yeager howled and ran toward the old man. He body-checked him with a shoulder and sent him crashing into the table full of instruments. He kept running and slammed through the door. He could hear Mosey running behind him. He made the stairs and took them 3 at a time until he hit the sidewalk. Yeager burst through the door and took off up the sidewalk. Out in the straightaway, all the trail running in the woods paid off, and he darted around a corner before Mosey made it out of the entrance. Just to be sure, he slipped left on the next street and right 1 block more as he pounded on the pavement, running a zigzag pattern that carried him away from the warehouse. Chapter 11. Yeager approached the corner of the building and peeked a sneak around. The coast was clear as far as he could see. He jogged down to his van, bending to check for anyone hiding under it before he climbed into the driver's door, cranked it up, and squealed away in a cloud of rubber-scented smoke. He turned off the boulevard and into a straightaway. The road was clear. He sighed and relaxed back into his seat. 2 hands reached around the back of the headrest and gripped him by the throat. He tried to shriek, but it was a strangled yelp. Rolf was laying in his bunk, hidden in the shadows and the mound of a sleeping bag. Yeager lost control of the wheel. It popped up on a curb and coasted to a stop against a building. Rolf yanked Yeager into the back and straddled him on the mattress. "Can't kick me in the nuts now, Ja!" The back doors folded open and bathed the interior in blinding white light. Halogen headlights from a rumbling Range Rover blinded Rolf. 2 men with AK-47 rifles aimed them inside the van. "Do we kill them?" one of the men called back. "Nein," a voice from the Range Rover answered. "Bring them both." The men reached in the back of the van and yanked Rolf off Warner. He began to struggle, but a rifle barrel shoved into the soft of his neck quieted him down. They dragged Warner out of the back and zip-tied his hands behind him. They did the same to Rolf and walked the 2 men into the back seat of the Range Rover. "Bring the van?" "We'll dispose of it at the compound," the man in the passenger seat instructed. He turned around and pointed a well-worn Luger at the 2 of them. "I do not wish to be cliché," Dieter said in a cultured accent, "but do not move." Warner would have raised his hands, but they were strapped behind him. Chapter 12. "It was quite an interesting story you posted on the internet, Mr. Yeager," Dieter said from the front. "Is it true?" Yeager clamped his lips closed and stared out the window. "I'm sure you know you will talk," Dieter continued. "It is not a matter of it, but when, once the persuasion starts." The SS officer turned in the seat and grinned at them. "I assure you, I can be very persuasive." Yeager shrugged. "Does the cat have your tongue?" "He buffeted my lip," Yeager lisped. "It hurts to talk, idiot." Rolf snorted. Dieter turned back to the front and watched as the Range Rover approached a compound on the outskirts of the city. It was a nondescript warehouse, the only structure on a block in an industrial compound. The doors rolled back to admit them and closed back to shut out the night. The warehouse was empty, except for several vehicles parked near the rear of the structure. They surrounded a single wooden chair. The rover they were in pulled to a stop in front of it, headlights casting long shadows across the floor behind it. "Ah, Mr. Yeager, I believe your seat is ready," said Dieter from the front with a chuckle. Yeager shivered. Rolf didn't snort this time. "Your discovery is of great benefit to us, you know." Dieter opened the door and ushered the two men out of the back. "We have been searching for this particular trove for quite some time." One of the SS guards with a bruised face and bandaged arm yanked Yeager across the room and shoved him into the chair. "Tell your friend I'm looking for him," he growled. "You didn't learn your lesson the first time?" Yeager shot back. The guard slapped him with an open hand, knocked him over backwards in the chair. "Pick him up," Dieter instructed. The guard hauled Yeager up off the dirty concrete floor and set him upright in the chair. "Shall I tie him?" "Not yet." Dieter motioned the other guard to move Rolf away several steps. He approached Yeager and bent down so their eyes were on the same level. "Mr. Yeager," said the Nazi, "I am a patient man, but as I stated, we have been looking for this possession of ours for quite a long time. It is the culmination of a plan set in motion many decades ago. I wish you would no longer stand in the way of that plan and tell us where the bunker is located." "You don't know?" Yeager asked. "If we knew, we would not need you." "But you were following me, removing the flags I had set." Dieter quirked up one eyebrow. "Someone else was following you?" He glanced at the two SS guards. "Juden," said the bruised man. "Das Juden," confirmed Dieter. "You see, it was not us. It was Mossad. Perhaps they hoped to thwart you as well before you delivered the weapons to us." "How could they know I would do that?" gulped Yeager. "I wouldn't do that." "But, Mr. Yeager," grinned Dieter, "you will." He drew back a fist and slammed it into Yeager's stomach. He doubled over. "Our fatherland has betrayed us." Dieter moved to one side. He slammed the back of his hand against Yeager's cheek. Pain exploded across his face, and he tried to cry out, but his breath was gone from the belly punch. "Germany has been a nuclear power since their treasonous pact with the Juden," he spat. "Now the Reich will be a nuclear power as well, with one small exception." "Your nukes are 70 years old?" gasped Warner. "No," shouted Dieter. "We're not afraid to use them. We will remove the poisonous Israel from the map." Yeager caught his breath. "Couldn't you just scratch it out with a pen or marker?" Dieter turned on him and marched over until their noses touched. "I see you are full of humor, Mr. Yeager." "I'm full of blood and guts and fear," said Warner. "I didn't have humor for dinner." "Tell me, Mr. Yeager, would you like to see those blood and guts and fear leak all over my clean concrete floor?" "I didn't know fear could leak," mumbled Warner. Dieter punched him in the stomach. He doubled over and retched. "I can have your fear spread in many directions, Mr. Yeager," threatened the Nazi. "I'm not going to talk," gasped Warner. He knew he would. Everybody talked. At least that's what all the spy guys said in the thrillers he used to read or watch on television. It's not a matter of if, but when. Still, he wasn't just going to hand the nukes over to Nazis. It's like that guy who postulated, would you kill Hitler in World War I if you could travel back? No good would come of it. Even if you saved 6 million Jews and 7 million others, plus the civilian casualties of World War II and priceless artifacts lost to the bombs and fires. All right, he thought as he struggled to catch his breath. He would kill Hitler if he had the chance to time travel and do so. But putting nukes in Nazi hands in this century wasn't going to happen. Not on his watch. "Tell them already," Rolf whined. Warner glared up at him. "Shut up, Rolf." Dieter motioned to one of his men. Two of them grabbed the giant and kicked the back of his knees so he buckled to the ground and knelt. Dieter pulled out a pitted bayonet and laid it against his throat. "Tell us where you found the bunker, Mr. Yeager, or your friend dies." Warner pushed himself up into a sitting position. "Go ahead," he wiped his mouth. "He's no friend of mine." The blade pressed deeper into the soft skin and drew blood. Rolf winced and whimpered. He began to struggle, and it was an effort for the two Nazi guards to hold him. "I am quite serious, Mr. Yeager." "Tell him," whimpered Rolf. "As I am," said Warner. "He means nothing to me. He fucked my girlfriend, then beat my ass, almost twice. I know you Nazis normally pay for that sort of thing, but I didn't like it." Dieter slapped the back of his hand across Rolf's face and nodded to the guards as he stepped away. "Then perhaps the blade will work on you." Dieter advanced on him. "Do your best, Nazi," Yeager growled. He felt like Sergeant Rock or some other war-torn vet standing up to the bullies of freedom. Or maybe he was just hoping the SS officer would get angry and accidentally kill him fast. It would make not telling them about the bunker so much easier. "Bring out the girl," Dieter smirked. Two more SS guards hauled Heidi out of a room across from them. Her mouth was duct-taped, and her hands were bound in front of her, eyes swollen and red from tears. She saw Rolf on the floor and screamed behind the gag. "I find," said Dieter as she was dragged over to him, "that tough men do not last long when tempted with a woman's flesh." He intertwined his fingers in her hair and yanked back to expose her neck. "Shall I start here?" He placed the blade against her pulsing jugular vein. "Or lower still?" The blade traced a shallow depression in her lily-white skin down her neck to nestle under a heaving breast. "Or maybe..." Dieter scraped the tip of the blade down her ribs and stomach, along the outer edge of her hip bone under the thin dress that clung to her body, and rested the tip between her legs. She sobbed. Rolf whimpered. Warner smirked. Yes, he loved her. There was no doubt in his mind, but was she worth a nuclear arsenal falling into the wrong hands? And were their hands any more wrong than these descendants of madmen? Besides, she cheated on him, broke his heart, stole from him, and had her man beat him senseless. She turned him into a homeless dirtbag treasure hunter, scraping by on the fringe of society on a far shore from home. It would make sense to let them torture her first, and then lie to say Rolf was indeed a friend so they would work on him too. The sacrifice of the two of them would buy him time to figure a way out of the mess, or a way to get himself killed, and no matter what had gone wrong in his life, Warner knew that the one thing he was really good at was figuring out how to get out of a mess. But it was Heidi. And Rolf, but mostly Heidi. He did love her, and none was going to kill her because of it. He had visited this mess on her door when he chose to go to her to publish it. "Wait," he stammered. Dieter let the blade rest. "I'll talk," said Warner. "Just let them go." "You know, that's quite impossible," said Dieter. "That's the deal, Mein Kampf. Let them go, and I'll take you to the bunker." "You will tell us where it is." "I can tell you, but that doesn't mean you'll find it. I didn't memorize the coordinates or anything. I can lead you there, right to the entrance." Dieter thought it over and nodded. He turned to the two SS guards. "Take them back to their apartment and wait for instructions." Warner stood up and dusted off his pants. "No, take them to a train station and let them get on a train. When I know they're safe, we'll go." "You're not in a position to be making such demands," Dieter chided. "You're getting what you want," Warner answered. "And I'm the only one who knows exactly where what you want is. What you want, I got." Dieter shook his head. "I have watched your American culture for decades," he snarled. "Still, I do not understand it. Your references, your choices, your weaknesses." "Ja, me and Kraut. Just let them go." Dieter reached into the pocket of one of the guards and extracted a set of keys to a Range Rover. "The one on the left," he held them out to Rolf. "Leave it at the station, and we will retrieve it." Rolf reached for the keys, but at the last second, Dieter jerked them back. "You will not speak of this," he said, "or we will come for you. Our connections reach everywhere, into the police, the government, the press. There will be no safe haven for you, and you will die." "We will be silent." Rolf glanced over at the still gagged Heidi. She nodded in vigorous agreement. "Rolf," called Warner, "take care of her." The giant took the keys from the Nazi and looped his arm around Heidi as he led her toward the waiting Range Rover. "Of course I will take care of her," he said. "What an idiotic thing to say." "No, I mean, I probably won't see you again." "See her again?" "Yes, we can only hope, right? Isn't that what she has been saying to you all this time? To be gone and stay gone." He opened the door and helped her inside the passenger seat. With a gentle touch, he reached up and stripped off the duct tape over her mouth. Heidi yelped. "Damn you, Warner!" she shouted over the giant's shoulder. "Fuck you for bringing this to me! Fuck you for doing this!" Rolf shut the door. He turned back toward the Nazis and Warner and flipped them the bird before moving to the driver's seat. "Are you regretting your decision to let them live now?" Dieter chuckled. Yeager shrugged. But yeah, the Nazi bastard was probably right. He was regretting it a little. Chapter 13. They didn't bind his hands this time. That was a good thing, he thought. He directed them to the edge of the woods and parked the Range Rovers at the spot where he camped. "It's through here," he told them. Yeager led them along the path, using the blazes of paint as guides. Plus, the ground he had traversed several times was beginning to show signs of wear. A trained woodsman could make it out. Even though many hikers avoided this area of the woods, he wouldn't be surprised if the path to the bunker didn't remain a secret for too long. That gave him some comfort. He was pretty sure the Nazis were going to kill him there. At least someone would find his body before long, unless the woods reclaimed the path over the winter season, and he would be trapped in the bunker forever, lost and forgotten. Even Heidi would forget, or at least forget to remember him. The look in her eyes, the fear both she and Rolf showed meant they wouldn't be talking to anyone. Hell, the Nazis would probably go back and kill them too, just to keep them quiet. If he died, no one would warn them. He led them into the clearing and marched to the depression in the ground. The metal was still bent back, and he slithered down into the darkness, not waiting for them to follow. Dieter shouted, and an SS guard dropped in beside him. He flicked on a flashlight and scanned around for Yeager. He was standing there by the opening, waiting. The guard aimed a pistol at him and instructed him to wait. For what? Yeager wasn't sure. They were coming through the only way out. Where would he go? Move, instructed Dieter. The 4 SS guards spread out, splaying splashes of light across the bunker walls. It's empty, Bruised Face reported. Dieter held his pistol toward Yeager's face. It's in the other room. Yeager held up both hands as he backed away. Lead, Dieter ordered. Yeager led them to the door, following in his own dusty footprints from yesterday. There were 2 distinct set of prints, one leading to the door and one set away. Even if Mossad had followed him to the woods, at least they hadn't made it down here. They reached the door on the far side, still stuck in its grimy tracks. Through here, Yeager slipped inside. Dieter and 2 guards were small enough to fit, but the other 2 men had been hitting the sausage and beer a little too hard, stretching the gray fabric of their uniform shirts to the absolute limit. They were muscle, sure, but with a thick layer of soft blubber on top. Big boys. Big boys couldn't fit in tight places. They cowered under Dieter's withering glare. Wait here, he said in a low voice. Yeager was pretty sure he was going to be shot, but he was glad he wasn't riding back with them in the Range Rover. He turned to the room. The 2 SS and Dieter played lights across the empty cavern. Yeager gulped. The nukes were gone. Which door now? Dieter asked. Yeager gulped again. We are very close to the glory of the Fourth Reich, Mr. Yeager. I grow very impatient with having to repeat myself. Yeager raised a finger and pointed at the only other door to the room. He wasn't sure what he would do when they reached it. He had been unable to open it earlier, but someone must have. Mossad had to have found another way down here, and that's why his were the only prints in the bunker. He spied the shelf and his machete still resting on top, untouched. The dust on the floor on either side of the rails showed dozens of footprints, scuffing a path that ran along either side, straight to the door. Yeager prayed that no one looked down, and if they did, he hoped they wouldn't ask questions. I need help opening it, he said as they reached the door. Dieter instructed the 2 SS guards to open it as Yeager stood aside by the shelf. They sheathed their weapons, and he offered to hold one of the flashlights. They gave him both. He stuck one under his left armpit to bathe the door in the funnel of light, and the other he held in his left hand. Dieter licked his lips as the 2 guards put their shoulders to the door and shoved. It groaned open with a gritting shriek. Dieter stepped closer and aimed his beam into the room beyond. He screamed. Scheiße! Yeager grabbed the machete and swung it around. He lopped off Dieter's hand holding the gun. The SS major's scream of rage rolled into a howl of agony. Both guards scrambled back as blood spurted from the end of the stump and bathed their faces and shirts. Yeager dropped to his knees and pawed for the fallen Luger. The light under his shoulder fell and rolled across the floor, creating a cascade of shadows in the strobing effect. Yeager grabbed the pistol, peeled off the clutching fingers just as the first guard shot at him. The bullet buzzed by his head with a whine, and he yelped and fired back. It sounded like a bat hitting a side of meat, followed by a thump on the floor. The other guard ran into the darkness. Dieter wrapped his shirt around his stump and screamed, "Kill him, you fool!" The guard fired at Yeager, but the shot went wide. "Shoot the light!" Dieter commanded. Yeager tossed the flashlight toward Dieter and jumped up to run for the far door. Bullets pinged off the concrete, first toward the light, then after his receding footsteps. The two big boy guards shined their light through the opening. Yeager ran to one side, avoiding their beams, and when he reached the thin entrance, raised the gun and shot through twice. Another SS guard collapsed, while the second backed away grunting in pain. Yeager shimmied through the opening and ran for the exit. Behind him, he could hear Dieter screaming, "Don't let him escape!" Chapter 14. Yeager made the opening with just a few bullets whining past his head. He scrambled across the clearing and ran through the woods. This was his element. Trail running had been his obsession for years, his sanctuary to run off the pain of being kicked out, being homeless, and now for his very life. He darted off the path and bushwhacked a new trail, relying on his sense of direction to lead him toward town. He had a Luger he could offload on the collector for some cash, and his van was somewhere if he could find it. He kept running. Trees whipped by as he dodged under branches and hurdled bushes. This was his element. Even if the Nazis made it out of the bunker, they wouldn't find him in the woods. All he had to do was avoid the roads until he made it to town. Then get paid, do a quick hunt for the van, and get out. It went just as he planned. He paused on the edge of a roadway and hid behind a tree just as one of the Range Rovers whizzed by. Yeager could make out Dieter in the front, holding his wrapped arm up. One guard was driving, with one more in the back. They must have left the dead in the bunker. He wondered for a minute if he should go back and explore, try to uncover some clues as to who stole the nuclear bombs, but shrugged it off. He was no detective, and he didn't want to get caught if the Nazis returned in force, or if Mossad showed up and decided to torture him again for a new location. Nope, he was going to stick with the original plan. Get paid, get out. It was a good plan. He was going to miss Heidi, though. Chapter 15. The van was in the exact same spot, with a crowd beginning to gather around it. He was lucky it was still early morning, so only the runners and dog walkers were out. 3 people were standing beside it, debating the level of drunkenness of the driver as he jogged up. Yeager glanced at the front of the van. Just a small dent in the bumper, and the building was unscathed. He hopped in the driver's seat, cranked it up, and this time, checked his bed and back just to be sure there were no ambushes waiting. There weren't. He dropped it in gear and went straight to the collector he knew. Chapter 16. The collector opened the door on the first ring. "I know it's early," Yeager started. "It's early," Fritz complained. "I'm not done with my coffee yet." "I found this authentic piece." Yeager held out the Luger, plus some SS ammunition, and I wanted to see if you would buy them. The collector stood back and let him in. 15 minutes later, he was out of the door with several hundred euros in his pocket. He could gas up, grab some food, and get gone. He wasn't sure where he would go yet. The Nazi had told Rolf they were everywhere, the police, the government. Staying in Germany was no longer an option. He wondered if he could buy enough gas to get to Spain. He heard Spain was lovely this time of the year, and he could hide out on the Camino Real. Chapter 17. Yeager stepped through the door of the diner and glanced around. It wasn't crowded. He spied a seat on a stool at the far end of the counter and made a beeline for it. A hand grabbed his arm and yanked him around. "You?" he gasped. "Are you following me?" Brill Wingfield gripped his bicep and squeezed. Yeager almost mewled. "I was going to ask you the same thing." Brill stared at him with cold, flat eyes. Yeager shivered. He had visited an aquarium to see a shark exhibit once, and that's what the look reminded him of. A shark's eyes. A predator sizing him up. "I'm trying to escape," he said. Brill let go of his arm and motioned to the stool next to him. "I saw." He nodded toward a flat-screen TV bolted to the wall above the counter. A picture of Yeager's face showed up with the words "Wanted" listed beside it. He tensed and started back toward the door. "Sit," Brill commanded. It was a voice that brooked no dissent. Yeager slid onto the stool and ducked down, working to be as inconspicuous as possible. Brill slid a knit cap into his lap. "Put it on." Yeager ducked his head under the cap and pulled it below his ears. It hit his hair and gave his face a different shape. "And these?" A pair of reading glasses slid across the countertop. Yeager rested them on the bridge of his nose. "Good enough," said Brill. Yeager nodded. "Thanks," he said. It wouldn't pass close inspection, but it would be enough for most people to overlook him. "How are you here?" Brill asked. "I could ask you the same thing," he almost said, but bit it off. Brill Wingfield did not seem the type of man who waited for his questions to be answered. "Those Nazis caught me again and took me back to the bunker where I found the nukes." Brill held out a hand to silence him while he ordered 2 coffees from the waitress. She filled their cups and didn't give Yeager a second glance. "Tell me everything," said Brill. Yeager did, including the parts about Heidi and Rolf and how he ended up there. "Nazi nukes?" Brill breathed in. Yeager nodded. "Only they weren't there. Someone beat us to them." "Damn it," Brill growled. Yeager waited, but the man wasn't going to offer anything else. "I got free, but now I'm wanted," he continued after a moment, glancing at the television. "I've got to make the border and get out of here." "If they put it out on the news, then they're watching the border," said Brill. "Where would you go?" "Anywhere that would have me." "Is that your van?" Brill nodded toward the parking lot. "Van, home. Yes, it's mine." Brill nodded. "You want to do me a favor?" "After your help last night? Anything," said Yeager. "Give me a ride to Bremerhaven, and I'll get you a berth on a ship." "Where's it going?" "Does it matter?" "No." Yeager shook his head. "I just want to be safe." "Don't we all?" Brill answered. He finished off the coffee. "I'm going to make a phone call. Get 2 more cups to go and meet me outside." Brill dropped a 20 on the counter. He slipped outside and pulled a smartphone from his pocket. "Carver," he said after dialing, "we've got a problem. Tell your alphabet boys someone has their hands on 6 nuclear missiles and get us a contract to find them. I'll be in Bremerhaven." He hung up just as Yeager slipped out the door, balancing the 2 cups. Brill relieved him of 1 cup. "You look like you could use some rest," he said. "Give me the keys." He took the keys from Yeager and cranked up the van. "You're going to love this ship," he told Yeager. "Captain makes you work for your cruise, but your room is bigger than this." "It's been my home for a while," answered Yeager. "I'm going to miss it." "Who said you had to leave it behind?" said Brill as he dropped the van in gear. They drove up the road to the north, headed toward the North Sea in the port town of Bremerhaven. The end. This has been an audio production of Nazi Nukes, written by Chris Lowry, narrated by Thomas Gloom.